call our meeting to order. First on the agenda is the roll call. Mike Bradley is supposed to be joining us online. Mike, are you there? Yeah, we'll give him a call. Okay, we'll move on. John Waller?
Present.
Marcy Winan?
Here.
Steve Wageman?
Here.
Pat Preiner here. And if we get joined, we'll just make note of that. First, next thing is to set the agenda. Anybody like to change or add or subtract from the agenda today?
President Preiner, staff would like to amend the agenda.
Okay.
We'd like a new action item 2. We'll call it the Minnesota Elected Official Drainage Registry Letter. And then we'll renumber the items.
Going down?
Yes.
Okay. Very good.
No other changes.
No other changes? Anything from the board? If not, I'll have a motion, please.
I move approval of the agenda with the addition.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? We still don't have Mike, so we'll still do the roll call. Manager Waller?
Yes.
Manager Wynant?
Yes.
Manager Wageman?
Yes.
And Manager Preiner, yes. Motion passes. Next is our consent agenda.
For the minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Approval of the minutes. Go ahead, Marcy.
Madam Chair, I move approval of the March 23rd, 2022 regular meeting of the Rice Creek Board of Managers.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, we'll have a roll call. Manager Waller?
Aye.
Manager Winan?
Yes.
Manager Wageman?
Yes.
Manager Preiner, yes. Motion passes. Now we get to the consent agenda. Any questions on that, Patrick?
Yes, President Preiner, Board of Managers, staff have 2 applications for your consideration today. We are proposing 1 change to permit 22-014. This is on page 24 of your packet. We would propose to strike and remove conditional item number 1. The easement requirement will be placed onto the Otter Crossing 20-074 permit that is coming in for amendment. So just removing it from this application and putting it on a different one.
Okay.
Is that the under Rule C, stormwater you're talking about?
Correct. Yep, the number 1 item.
Okay, with that, we can have a motion.
Madam President, I move to Caprock permit number 22-012 and 22-014.
With changes?
Yeah, with changes.
Okay.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Okay, I'll call for a vote. Manager Waller?
Yes.
Manager Winan?
Yes.
Manager Wageman?
Yes.
Manager Preiner, yes. Motion passes. Okay, now we're going to recess our regular meeting.
President
And Mike
Preiner,
is on
I'll
here.
note that.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Mike. So we're coming to the public hearing portion of our meeting. And we'll start this public hearing on the proposed reestablishment and correction of the drainage system records of Ramsey County 8 under statute section 103E 101 subdivision 4A. I'd like to welcome everyone today. The purpose of this hearing is to review the engineer's investigation and report the findings and receive comment from those affected by the proposed reestablishment and correction of the public drainage system record. This is an evidentiary hearing process. The proceedings are being recorded in order to preserve the record. The order of business for the hearing will be as follows. First, Mr. Schmidt, the District Drainage Inspector, will introduce a presentation of information related to the engineer's review of the public drainage system. Mr. Schmidt will assist Mr. Kolb, the district's legal counsel, and Mr. Munson, the district's engineer. Following the staff preparation, I will open the public hearing for comment. The board would like to hear your comments on the proposed reestablishment and correction of the drainage system records and any information relevant to that purpose. Specifically, the board is interested in whether it is missing information used to define the public drainage system. Number 2, whether the recommended alignment, grade, or configuration of a ditch creates concerns about loss of drainage benefits, whether and how your land drains to the public system, whether you have concerns or issues associated with the alignment of the public system crossing your property. During the public hearing, managers may ask questions of staff and consultants making presentations and of commenters in order to clarify any testimony. In addition, if a member of the public asks a question and a manager believes a response from the district staff or district consultant can readily resolve that issue or can enrich the testimony, the manager may ask me to have an appropriate staff member or consultant speak to the question. I will exercise my judgment of whether to allow the discussion. Managers' expression of their positions and general discussion during the subject of public hearing should be avoided during the public comment portion of the public hearing. Board discussion will occur after all the members of the public have had a chance to speak and the public comment period has been closed. Board discussion may occur and be concluded at this or subsequent meeting as the board decides. During the public comment portion of the hearing, I will call for comments. When you are recognized and invited to speak, please come to the podium to make your comments. Please speak clearly and state your name and address for the record before making your comment. If you have a specific question concerning the proposed reestablishment and correction of the public drainage system record, we may ask our administrator, engineer, or legal counsel to respond. If you have anything in writing you'd wish to submit, you may present this item and I will note receipt to the record. Would any of the board members wish to offer any comments before we begin? Okay, seeing none,
We have a large audience today. Did everyone sign in?
everybody, I believe, was signing in as they came. Anybody who hasn't signed in? Okay, please, everybody sign in that count. Mr. Schmidt, you can go ahead and start.
Thank you, President Preiner. Before we begin the presentation by the engineer, I'd like to introduce myself, Tom Schmidt, Rice Creek Watershed District Public Drainage Inspector. Then joining online, we have Garrett Munson, who's the District Drainage Engineer, and then John Kolb, who's the District's Drainage Legal Counsel. And then Chris Otterness, who's the District Engineer, who's here as a resource. And then Nick Tomshek, who's our District Administrator. And of course, the board, who's sitting as the Drainage Authority today for this hearing. It's Steve Wagaman, who is the Anoka County Representative. Patricia Preiner, who is an Anoka County Representative. Marcy Wanet, who is a Ramsey County Representative. Mike Bradley, who's joining us online, Ramsey County Representative. John Waller, who's a Washington County Representative. Before we begin the presentation, I'll ask John Kolb to recite the noticing that was done for this meeting for the record, please. John?
Madam Chair, members of the board, members of the public, let me just confirm that you can hear me properly.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. For proceedings of this type under the Drainage Code, we are required to give specific notices pursuant to statute and additional notices pursuant to board policy. For this hearing, we provided published notice in the St. Paul Pioneer Press newspaper on March 23rd and 30th of 2022 and April 6th, once a week for 3 successive weeks. To supplement that publication, we also published in the Shoreview Press newspaper on March 15th and the Citizen newspaper on March 24th. To facilitate mailed notice, we provided a postcard notice to the owners of all property within the sub-watershed of Ramsey County Ditch Number 8, and that postcard notice was mailed on March 14th. We provided notices to the cities of Shoreview and Lino Lakes, the Board of Water and Soil Resources, the Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Transportation, Anoka County, the Anoka County Engineer, the Anoka Conservation District, Ramsey County, the Ramsey County Engineer, the Ramsey County Soil and Water Conservation District on March 15th. We also posted the notice on the district's website and provided the notice by email notification to those requesting such notification on March 14th. The district also posted notice at its office commencing on March 15th and remaining posted through the date of today's hearing. We provided a copy of the notice and the historical review memorandum, the technical memorandum from your engineer dated February 2nd, 2022, to the DNR, Board of Water Soil Resources, and Army Corps of Engineers on March 15th. We also provided the notice and the historical review technical memorandum to the DNR by posting on the DNR Region 3 email noticing platform on March 14th. That concludes the notices given for today's hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Combs. Okay.
Thank you, John. Garrett, would you like to begin your presentation, please?
You bet. Good morning, Madam President, Board of Managers, staff, and people in the audience. Today we are speaking about Ramsey County Ditch 8 and the historical review that was completed in an effort to support the reestablishment of record for the public drainage system. A little bit on the purpose of this presentation. It is to define and describe what we refer to as the as constructed and subsequently improved condition, or what we call the ACSIC, of this public drainage system. Today we're going to talk a little bit about that ACSIC and how it was determined, and at the end there will be an opportunity for the public to comment on it. As President Priner indicated, if you have any additional information that you think is pertinent to these proceedings regarding the drainage system itself. We did have a public information meeting on November 30th of 2021. So some of this material should be repeat if you were in attendance to that. But today's proceeding is specific to the reestablishment of records for this drainage system. Ramsey County Ditch 8 is a public drainage system. So it's a ditch. It was constructed early 1900s, and we'll get a little bit into the history of it. But the public drainage system is just a fancy way of saying, in this case, a ditch. Alternatively, it can also be piped. In this case, there was a natural conveyance that was expanded upon and turned into a drainage system. It generally flows east to west and south to north. It discharges into Rice Creek here in the upper left corner of this image. It's an outlet for parts of Shoreview and Lino Lakes, including both residential developments and a few public waters along the drainage system, which are of note. Ramsey County Ditch 8, I'll be referring to as RCD 8 for the rest of the presentation. Then we have for today, of course, the legal standard of decision. John, would you like to jump in on this slide?
I certainly can. For every drainage system, there is a requirement that the board, as the drainage authority, inspect and repair. And in order to ensure that those inspections and repair are consistent with the legal limitations for the function of the drainage system, the board must consider what was the as constructed or subsequently improved hydraulic capacity of the drainage system. Oftentimes, the records that define the hydrologic capacity of the drainage system are missing or incomplete. Oftentimes, the portion of the record that would define the alignment or the scope of right-of-way or the area that was occupied and used for the original construction of the ditch is not well defined. And what the code provides is that if after investigation we find that those records are incomplete or otherwise missing, that the board may initiate a proceeding to correct those records. And they correct those records by an investigation addressing some minimal items, but then often supplemented by additional analysis by your engineer to determine by a weight of evidence what is the most likely configuration of the ditch as originally constructed or subsequently improved, and what was the most likely area contemplated and included by the original construction. By common reference, we would call that the right-of-way of the drainage system. And so that is what happened in this instance. The board made those findings and initiated these proceedings.
Thanks, John. A little bit on the role of the district as drainage authority is they are administering the system on behalf of the benefited landowners. And those benefited landowners are the ones who own the system, but the drainage authority acts on their behalf to act as a decision maker and manager in the best interest of all the benefited landowners. Additionally, the Rice Creek Watershed District is a water management authority throughout all of Rice Creek Watershed District, and therefore they view RCD8 in the context of the entire watershed district and balance the needs of all users within the district, including those of RCD8 and those downstream. As a drainage authority, they can receive petitions from the benefited landowners of RCD8. So for landowners who benefit from the system, you can engage the district as drainage authority with petition processes for the management of the drainage system. So the purpose of doing a record reestablishment, as John touched on, is to make sure that the records are in order to inform the decision-making process of the district as a drainage authority. Many of these records over time may have been lost or are incomplete. So the intent through this historical review is to look at the best available information and, using the greatest weight of evidence, reestablish that record to describe the system in its alignment and profile and set that as constructed and subsequently improved condition. And that condition then is the baseline for any future maintenance and modifications. And this is important because it helps set thresholds about what is considered a repair versus what's an improvement, and assists with a lot of regulatory considerations for future actions. And just one note that today's proceeding is germane just to the system itself, its alignment, its profile, its right-of-way. This is not a comprehensive study of the drainage area or any design considerations for peak flows and things like that. This is a historical perspective on the system and the records available. Any other activities about repair or any kind of drainage area study or things like that would be a future activity of the drainage authority as they so choose or are petitioned to complete. The RCD8 system, don't have a lot of historical information on it, but we do know it was constructed around 1910, and that's where that natural conveyance into Rice Creek was extended, and the cross-section changed to be an open channel flowing through a few public waters, which we'll show here in just a little bit. It's about 3.5 miles of open channel. It's a main trunk and 2 branches, and the Rice Creek Watershed District became the drainage authority for this public drainage system in 1973 when it was transferred from the county. So in the purple hatch here on the image, we have the originally benefited area of the Ramsey County Ditch 8. A few things to notice is the blue line is the contributing drainage area determined from LIDAR and some other pieces of evidence. So the topography of the earth. A few items of note is that the original benefits did not extend into Anoka County, although the alignment does discharge through Anoka County. It also originally extended across over towards Poplar Lake, which is now within the drainage area of ACD 25. The district operates a little differently than some traditional funding mechanisms at times. These benefited landowners, though, would have been the ones originally assessed for the construction and repairs to the drainage system. Now the district has some operational budgets for completing that inspection and maintenance as a watershed district. So one thing to note here is with this drainage area, RCD8 is located near the headwaters of a relatively ambiguous part of the watershed, where depending on channel condition downstream, the timing of an event, or any obstructions that may occur at a given time, flow may discharge a number of directions at the upstream end of any one of these branches or through these public waters, whether it's to the north or the south, east, or west. But this is the general surface area that is believed to discharge to RCD8. And again, if there's any wonderment about that drainage area, that is beyond the scope of just the alignment and profile of the drainage system. But that type of discussion can definitely be entertained by the district. If you have any questions, of course, reach out to them as the drainage authority. So here's a comparison of the as established alignment that we have from historical records versus the current alignment. And you can see for a majority of the system, particularly to the west, those alignments overlap very nicely. And then of course, as we move east of Hodgkin Road, that's where we can see the alignment has been altered over time. And a lot of that occurred as part of a system modification in 1983, which we'll touch on next. So that system modification was an improvement. Petition for in 1983, it wasn't an after-the-fact petition, but this was all part of the establishment of evergreen ponds and carry ponds, that development there, where a good portion of the drainage system was converted into these ponds with an outlet control structure right near Hodgkin Road. As part of that improvement, the petition included the benefited landowners of that area taking responsibility for any cost of maintaining that improved portion of the drainage system. And it also included the impoundment of waters in that area with that manhole outlet control structure near Hodgkin Road. During the investigation of this effort, we found that that manhole is there, but it is absent of a weir that was indicated in the original design drawings. And that's an important piece of evidence to be considered in any future maintenance activities or further modification or repair of the system in that area. Another important part of the drainage system is its right-of-way. And this is the area that's necessary, reasonably necessary for the Drainage Authority to inspect and maintain that public drainage system. And it's the area believed to be originally damaged or where material was placed during construction and repair of the drainage system in previous efforts. And therefore those damages paid to the landowner, and those damages are for the perpetual and ongoing use of the drainage system, meaning that they're a one-time payment. And within that right-of-way, the Drainage Authority has the right of entry for inspection and maintaining the drainage system, as well as the placement of future spoil material related to maintenance or repairs. You'll note these widths are centered on the drainage system, typically about a 20-foot width from the top of bank. So if you were to go out to the drainage system and you can see the grade break in the ground where it starts to tip towards the ditch, that's the top of bank. So you go 20 feet from there generally, and that's the area that the Drainage Authority has a right of access for inspection and repair. Then separately in the improved area, the eastern portion of the drainage system in carry ponds and evergreen ponds, that there's a drainage and utility easement conveyed for the maintenance of those ponds, and where it's assumed that the right-of-way of the drainage system would co-align with that for the purpose of maintaining a conveyance path through those ponds. A little bit about the current condition of the drainage system. We're going to move generally downstream to upstream. And you can see on the right-hand side our little red circle indicating the location where we're looking, and then of course the image on the left. This is near the outlet where the drainage system turns into a little more of a natural S conveyance as we reach this bend of the Rice Creek. Then moving upstream from there, you can see that there's a lot of trees within the right-of-way, as well as some vegetation within the channel. Of course, this is with snow cover, but if you go out there now, you'll note a lot of vegetation. An important part of this when looking at the conditions of the drainage system is trees can prevent access for inspection and maintenance. So it's helpful to maintain a clean and clear right-of-way corridor for that inspection and maintenance, as well as keeping it free of permanent structures as that's doable. And if there are any permanent structures there, to make sure you're in conversation with the Drainage Authority about how work can be completed in that area at the time of any future work occurring. An important thing to note that if any future work does occur on the system, there will be lots of opportunities for the public to engage through additional landowner meetings or public hearings associated with those actions. Continuing upstream, you can see as we start to head into this open public water here, continuing with that theme of vegetation within the channel, a lot of tall grasses. Grasses can definitely impede flow of water, so they can slow down the design discharge of the channel quite a bit. So that's something important to take note of when we're looking at the condition of a public drainage system. Moving out into the middle of the public water, you can see a lot of cattail and reed canary. But interestingly, you can definitively see the alignment of the public drainage system when looking at aerial photography. Of course, in this case, our blue line overlaps that, so it's not so clear in this image. But it's nice to know that the alignment and the footprint of the drainage system on the surface do line up nicely. Continuing upstream, we start to get towards Hodgkin Road. Again, lots of vegetation within the channel itself as we start to move towards the area that was modified by improvement. So this is as we're heading north along Hodgkin Road. The channel has become a little more wide and also heavily vegetated. We have the conditions of some submerged culverts in this area. There's some sediment within the channel that is likely causing a tailwater condition on the discharge from those culverts and likely being the controlling outlet of the ponds within Cary Pond and Evergreen Ponds. So continuing upstream even further, this is where we have a culvert crossing the pipeline corridor here, which is in relatively poor condition but does pass water. An important thing to note is the city has also been paying attention to these ponding areas, and they are aware of the conditions, and they have been coordinating to complete activities to maintain the conveyances that are associated with their public roadways in the area. And there's an ongoing discussion about the condition of the ponds and what can be done to make sure that they're being maintained in a way that serves their function into the future. And then just a general condition of some of those road crossings as we move through the ponds. Now as we move towards branch 1, this is which extends south towards Turtle Lake. Again, this is in the public water area where we have a wide open wetland with a lot of cattails and reed canary grass and a generally vegetated channel. As we get to the upstream end where there's a trail crossing, you can see some head walls near a culvert. One important thing to note is that the public drainage system extends through this trail, but it does not extend through County Road 3. The RCWD system is not the outlet for Turtle Lake. It has a separate primary discharge, but these culverts are here to serve the roadway and any general overflow that may occur in the area. As I said, before, the drainage area of this system is a little ambiguous as you get to this very flat area where, depending on timing and condition of various conveyances, where water is flowing may change. So based on the review of the records and the current condition, there were a few items of note as we went through. There have been a number of landowner concerns regarding normal water elevations in Cary Ponds, whether it's too high or too low. We did note that outlet control structure was missing its weir, which I said for any future activity on the system or repair or cleaning out of the channel, that's definitely an item of note that should be considered. There is accumulated sediment within the channel on either side of Hodgkin Road. And just to note that the city of Shoreview is in conversation with the district discussing the future management of the ponded areas of Cary Ponds and Evergreen Ponds and how that management might be completed to best meet the needs of the landowners who benefit from that system. Generally, there's heavy vegetation choking the channel along portions of RCD8 west of Hodgkin Road. And then there is the County Road J culvert is quite elevated above the as constructed profile. That is an interesting point where any future activity on the drainage system to do something like repairing that culvert, the district as drainage authority would definitely consider any effect that may have on upstream public waters. So what's next for the drainage system? Well, today the Drainage Authority, the Rice Creek Watershed District as Drainage Authority, is considering the findings in order to reestablish the public drainage system record. We're recommending continued routine inspection and maintenance. Simple maintenance by the Drainage Authority can address a few of those known problem areas. And then again, there would be future landowner engagement ahead of any repairs or other activities on the drainage system outside of repair, like study of the drainage area, things like that. So this is definitely not the end of the road for the drainage system. This rather is setting the baseline for that future consideration of actions to be taken on the drainage system. And that concludes my informational part of the presentation. And we will eventually open up to public comment. But some things to consider when the opportunity to comment comes is there information that you believe was missed when defining the public drainage system? And in that I mean the alignment and profile of the drainage system. Are we accurately describing the extent to your knowledge? Do you as a landowner have any concerns about loss of drainage benefit if something were to change on the system? And if there's any concerns or issues associated with your specific property, that be brought to the drainage authority, particularly in a one-on-one setting, may be appropriate with the drainage inspector.
Thank you, Garrett. Any questions from the board?
Madam Chair, Garrett, you showed pictures east of Hodgson Road about a pipeline corridor and a culvert that was in disrepair. Where are we at here? Yes. So what did you say about the
Correct.
pipeline? Or
So there is a transmission pipeline, as there are throughout the district. You can actually see the corridor pretty clearly here, continuing on to the northwest, where a number of pipeline owners transmitting crude or refined or any kind of oil, kind of crisscross the metro area. So there is a culvert here that is actually at or below the as-constructed profile of the drainage system.
Okay.
And I believe the city was considering looking at this and maybe slip lining it, but the condition of it is definitely noted, and it's something to be addressed. Currently, it's not known to be causing a specific problem that was observed during the review for this project.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the board for Garrett? Okay. Seeing none, we can start the public portion. We just ask for you to please, if you'd like to comment, come up to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and feel free to give us your comments. That's what we're looking for here today. Anybody that would like to comment today, please come forward.
Madam President, there's a comment in the chat line that you may want to call to your attention.
Okay, thank you.
John Thompson, I'm at 6125 Baldwin Lake Road in Lino Lakes. Ditch 8 goes right through my property. I actually have 3 pieces of property there, and Ditch 8 divides the first piece of property from the second piece. When I was looking at my wife was actually looking at your overall view last night. She printed out one of the items that shows a realignment where it maybe goes across my property. And this is an RCWD map. Maybe I should give it to the engineer so he can look at it. It shows basically that the new alignment would be moving south of where the current creek is, ditch 8 is. And
President Preiner, excuse me, Mr. Kolb is noting that it's difficult to understand you or hear you, sir.
I'm
so
sorry.
If you could, let's confirm that that's working there. There we go. Thank you.
Maybe I had it too low.
Yeah.
Okay,
Fair
can
enough.
you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
I can try to speak up to it, it's not a problem.
Thank you.
So at any rate, it shows an alignment, a new alignment of the ditch moving south of where it is and actually crossing Baldwin Lake Road in a different place. The problem with that is it would go probably right through my garage where it looks like you have it right now. So that's my question. That's my number one question: is where is that going? How far south is that alignment going? I can't tell from that little map. So and obviously that's my concern.
Madam President, if I may address the question here.
Sure.
So the map that he provided here, it appears that he has shown on here the current alignment on the map, and then one of the alignments shown on the green on the map, and I know that others won't be able to see this here.
Is that
But
possible to put that up?
What's that?
Could we put that up at all? No? Okay.
Yeah, this is right off your,
Yeah, it's just
stuff.
easier for everybody
Yeah.
to.
Sure,
Okay.
I'll just verbally note that this, the other line on the map is actually the historic alignment that was provided from a map back in 1910.
so that's not the new alignment?
No, we are not proposing to
Okay.
realign the drainage system.
All right,
All we're doing at this time is to try to identify what the condition of the drainage system was that was either originally constructed or subsequently
Okay.
improved in the future. So there's no intent at this
there's
time
no intent to move
modify
that? Okay,
anything there.
that was
Yeah.
my concern with that picture, so we're fine with that. Question number 2, I have a bridge that goes across connecting my 2 pieces of property. Is that going to be affected by your improvement of this channel? That would be my next question.
Go ahead.
Sure, Madam President, we don't have any repairs planned at this time. Certainly, any sort of crossing of the drainage system can become a concern for us as we're doing repairs if it
Sure.
is blocking the ability to maintain the system. We would have to take a look at your specific site and see if there's a concern with that. But that would be something we would coordinate with you if we do need to make repairs at that location in the future.
Okay,
And generally, these bridges, they can be problematic sometimes if the excavator's out there and is trying to excavate underneath or around the bridge, but it depends on, how tall the bridge is and whether or not the equipment
Yeah.
can reach underneath it efficiently. And what we've done sometimes in the past is have the contractors pick the bridge up if it's light enough, move it off the side and put it back at.
I think it'd fall apart if you did that.
And that is often
Okay,
what
that
can
bridge has
happen.
been there 60 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I rebuilt it obviously in that period. I've lived on that property 49 years. Now, I just have another comment about the maintenance, and I've lived there, like I say, a long time. I've never seen anybody maintain that area, that county ditch whatsoever. In fact, there's a tree growing up in the middle of that ditch, in the middle, before it gets to my bridge, that is over 100 feet tall. It's a willow. So I'm happy you're doing something, but they haven't done anything for so long. And I've been there since '73. It's just incredible. So, okay, I guess I have no other questions. So that answered my questions.
Thank you for that.
Yep,
Okay,
President.
Go ahead.
President Pronner, I was just going to note that Council Kolb had raised his hand. That may be important in the moment.
Okay. Mr. Cole?
Madam President, members of the board, if we could clarify for the speaker and just for my sake, as I'm going to end up having to write an order on this, I believe that the original question had to do with the historic alignment apparent in the drainage system record from original construction plans, which is represented by the green line on the graphic currently on the screen, but that what's being proposed to be adopted as the corrected record is what is indicated with the blue chain line on the screen, and that reflects substantial modification that's occurred to the system since that original design plan. And I just want to make sure that we're clear on that, that what's being adopted today is that functional alignment along the blue chain, which reflects the modifications that have been made in the system since original construction.
Chris, can you confirm that?
Yes, I can confirm that we are our part of the record on this, we have identified in the report is that blue line, as John has indicated.
Okay. Does that answer the question, Mr. Cole?
Thank you, that clarifies it.
Okay. So we also have other people out in the chat. Why don't somebody just identify themselves and go ahead and give us your name and address and speak to the board? I see there might be 4 people out there that have comment.
And actually, Madam Chair, I think the chat piece could be expanded so we can see who's, no?
Because it is a legal proceeding, it should be vocalize. The chat isn't a part of our
Okay.
record. So
Okay, but we don't see who's lining up to,
No, all we
we
know,
can
that's,
just ask them.
that's why I'm asking
Okay.
for the
Yeah,
members out there
please
to identify
talk
yourself.
to the
and-
board.
okay.
Okay,
Hi, good
yeah.
morning. My name is Greg Sinberg. I live at 5850 Daniel Court. My comment was regarding the previous question that one of the council members brought up, the culvert and disrepair to the east of Hodgson Road. There are two brand new homes that were recently constructed on that corridor that has really changed the vegetation, the impervious surfaces, the flow of water into that pond in that area. And because the culvert is in such disrepair, I know myself as well as the neighbors around me along Daniel Court who had, concern about how the new construction is going to impact that. Because, for instance, I have a swale that runs through my backyard down into the holding pond, and it already has been backing up in the past 3 to 4 years from that culvert having a slower flow. And so, I think we were just hoping to, have some attention there. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Anybody could address that at this point, or?
Madam President, yeah, I can address that briefly. So what the speaker was chatting about appears to be a concern regarding new activity on the landscape that he feels could potentially be affecting function along the ditch. That kind of work would not necessarily be relevant to the drainage system itself. It isn't something that would be affecting the alignment, cross-section profile of the ditch. However, that is something that potentially could be related to Rice Creek Watershed District rules, depending on how large of a project it is and whether it triggers a Rice Creek Watershed District rule. So if there's a concern, we could note that and take a look into whether or not there's a permit at that location and whether activity would be required under a permit.
I would like to have it looked into.
Madam President.
Go ahead.
Mr. Engineer, is this the culvert that you said? I understood that one of these culverts was too high. And is this the one that is or not?
Madam President, Manager Waller, no, this one we do not believe to be too high. The one that is higher is at County Road J. This culvert shown on the map here is at that pipeline crossing.
And the pipeline is in proper, is it low enough also?
We don't know the exact elevation of the pipeline itself, but the culvert is at the proper elevation right now, so it does not appear that the pipeline is in conflict with the culvert or the public drainage system.
Was the culvert in good repair?
No, and if you look on the photo here, it's quite rusted. The end of it is mashed up, and it's quite possible that there's some performance issue, due to the fact of its age.
Thank you.
Let's move on to the.
Thank you.
Let's go back to the gentleman who stood here before. Please come forward, name and address for the records.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. My name is Joe Springer. I live at 5809 Evergreen Lane. I live on the ponds. Since we have the public record, or we have a map up here right now, I live right in this portion. In fact, one of these houses over here is my home. I've lived on the ponds for almost 30 years, so I've got a bit of just a layperson's perspective of the water flow and what's been happening with the ponds. Quite frankly, over the past 30 years, the ponds have really silted up. I mean, it is very, very noticeable. And as one of the other speakers said, there really has been no attempted maintenance that I'm aware of, especially in all the culverts that we're talking about here. And so specifically in the area to the north of where we live, there is one of those very large highway culverts that you saw in some of the pictures. And in Years ago, when we first moved in, that is it right there. Years ago, when we first moved in, we used to be able to very easily take a paddle boat through there, and I'm talking about one of the cheap, heavy paddle boats, not one of the nice ones with the metal pontoons on it. Haven't been able to do that probably for close to 20 years. After that, we used to be able to take a two-person canoe through there pretty easily if you stayed in the middle of the channel. Now you can't even take a canoe through there, and I'm talking at any time of the year. I'm not talking about at any type of low water. I'm talking at any time of the year. Now, I frankly have trouble taking a kayak through there. You still hit bottom. You have to shoo yourself through. You have to take your paddle and push yourself through to try to even get through there. And again, I mean, it's not this board is not about whether I can use my watercraft or not. I perfectly understand that. But I mean, just in terms of talking about the amount of hydrological flow that is coming through here, I mean, it is absolutely being hung up. And I think another good piece of evidence about that is just the water quality has degraded quite a bit. And I understand that what we're talking about here is flow and historic flow, but again, over 30 years, when you get flowing water, I mean, that the water quality is better. And we used to swim quite a bit in the lake. And again, this board is not about whether I can swim in my lake or not, but for the last few years, I and frankly most of my neighbors, including my neighbor across the lake and so on, say we don't feel comfortable swimming in the lake anymore. I mean, it used to be you could come out and be happy, coming out and sitting in a beach chair. I swam once last summer and I felt like I had to go hit the showers immediately afterwards because frankly the water smells. And my kids are now grown, but my daughter used to be able to sit there and make mud pies. If you are on the edges of the lake, on the ponds anymore, you're going to get hit with leeches. You're going to have to pull leeches off. In another area, and actually in one of the areas that I consider to be one of the better parts of our lake, the area that is right across from Booker Park in kind of this longer channel up here. This channel to me, because that's the inlet up to the north, and then it flows down all the way through, as you know. This channel up to the north, right up in that area where the person in the cursor has, and right along in the middle up there, our neighbors across the street had a kid's birthday party for the neighbors up there. And again, that to me has always been kind of a deep, clear channel. All the kids came out with swimmer's itch. Again, and you don't get swimmer's itch if you've got good water that is flowing through. And our lake, at least, still looks okay, but it is really full of weeds. I mean, it's at least not an eyesore. If I were one of my neighbors in this area in the lake, just immediately up to us, again, 20 years ago, even 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, this whole lake area was fairly clean. I mean, and it is just full of weeds and smells bad. So again, in terms of, what has been happening over the last 30 years, very noticeable difference. And I really think, the water quality and the water flow has suffered a great deal.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anybody online that'd like to speak? Let's kind of just go back and forth. Okay, go ahead, Terry. Please name and address.
Yeah, my name's Terry Neese. I live at 5913 Turtle Lake Road. And I understand that this meeting is to look at the original alignment. I just wanted to make everyone aware that after 1983, a culvert was put in under County Road J, Ash Street, right at the beginning of the main trunk up by Bucher Park. And there are many acres of Lino Lake, Anoka County, draining into Rice Creek Ditch 8. And it's a very significant amount of water is coming in from up there. and that the district should be aware of that and look into it and see if that's proper, and if it is, take note of how much flow is coming in that isn't shown here in this report.
Okay, thank you. Gentlemen, there you go. Name and address for the record.
It was 5913 Turtle Lake Road.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bill Lazarus. I live at 5835 Kit Carey Court South in Shoreview, right near the outlet on the ponds. And I just had a question. In John's presentation on the last slide, he mentioned something about Shoreview being interested in transferring, I'm not sure exactly, some sort of authority. I've always been a little bit curious, unclear about Shoreview's authority over the ponds versus the watershed districts. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on what that comment meant.
Chris?
Madam President, to answer the question, so the drainage system was originally established by Ramsey County, and then it was subsequently transferred to the Rice Creek Watershed District in, I believe, 1973. And so the Rice Creek's authority and management of the drainage in this area is really limited to the stormwater flow that the drainage system provides. And specifically in those locations we had shown on the earlier map as being those blue lines on the map. It does not extend in any way into management of the ponds themselves. I'm not aware of what the city of Shoreview's responsibilities are in relation to the ponds or other stormwater features that are in the landscape in this area, but I guess I can say that Rice Creek's management is solely to the flow provided by the ditch running through the ponds and then as the outlet of the pond.
Okay, so we don't know what Shoreview's supposed to be. Is there any difference in authorities? I think was what he was asking.
Yeah, and so yeah, Shoreview would have its own things that it manages. Certainly
So
the
you're not
storm
managing
sewer.
the same issues?
No, we're not managing the same infrastructure, and again, we're just in preliminary discussions with the city about how this management may look into the future. But as of right now, the district is in charge of the drainage system and is solely the entity that is responsible for the drainage system itself. It's important to note, though, that each municipality is responsible for its own culverts that cross the drainage system. So, the Anoka and Ramsey County together share the responsibility for the County Road J culvert. The city of Shoreview is responsible for the Hogsden Road culvert and other roadway culverts that would be crossing the drainage system.
Follow up?
Just wondered if John would respond on what he meant by that bullet point on the slide.
John Cole? I don't think it was John, I think it was Garrett. Was it?
Madam President,
You might have meant Garrett.
Yeah, I think so.
I believe he meant me. The intent of sharing that information was rather to indicate that there is ongoing discussion between the city and the district, and that management of the ponds is a topic of discussion and trying to figure out how that is best completed into the future. And as Chris indicated, that's very preliminary at this point. There's no action being, recommended necessarily or even proposed, but they are aware of the need for those ponds to have a little more intensity in its management. In fact, they are planning to this year complete cleaning of those culvert crossings along the drainage system that were referenced. Previously being able to access. They have the permits and everything to, or at least that I'm aware of. They've gone through the permitting process to excavate the sediment out of those connective channels and maintain their crossings of the public drainage system. And then regarding the management of the ponds as a whole, that discussion is just in the beginning to figure out how that can best be completed into the future.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Tom Wazowski. I'm actually city engineer for the city of Shoreview, so I figured it would be good for me to step up. So as Garrett was mentioning, that is correct. We are currently working through the process, the permitting process, and working with some contractors to do a cleaning of sediment from those channel areas where we do have the larger culverts going into the roadways. We did have those surveyed, and kind of the last step we have to go through is actually a permitting process, probably through the watershed here. We do also know about the condition of that one culvert that there was a picture of, and we do plan to go out and do an inspection of that culvert and determine, what may need to be done to get that kind of in a better condition, whether it needs to be replaced, whether it can be lined, and we'll kind of work to figure that out. And as Garrett mentioned too, yes, we've had some kind of preliminary conversations about management of the ponding areas in the future, and one of the first steps, of course, was going through this process, and then as we understand that there are some cities or other government entities that have kind of taken over portions of these systems, just because it seems to fit better, who should be responsible for maintaining and looking at these areas. And I think that's always been kind of a tough position for both the watershed and the city. I don't think anyone really kind of knew where their authority was as far as what should be under whose authority for maintenance. And so I think that'll be nice to go through this process and get that kind of figured out. So,
yeah. Thank you.
So, any questions for me?
Questions?
Thank you.
Great. Okay, anybody online that'd like to speak?
This is Jim Farnsworth. I posted something in the chat and I'll read it here. I'm at 144 Woodridge Lane, actually across the county line in Anoka, Lino Lakes. And there's a pond behind our property. It's considered part of the RCD 8, I guess. The pond is behind our property, the southwest of us. And we received a notice this winter that the pond will be used for construction water or something like that. And we were instructed that we shouldn't use it for recreational use. So the neighbors, they set up a pond on it. So where your cursor is at, if you go up to that one, yep, that's the one. We saw one instance of water entering the pond this winter. And we are wondering if this is going to continue next winter. And really what's behind my question is, how long should we expect to recommend that we stay off of the pond during the winter for ice skating and hockey?
Okay. Anybody have not? Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Madam President, I believe the pond that this gentleman is speaking of is not part of the public drainage system or is not in line with the public drainage system. I'm not aware of anything that the district is doing that would be related to the concerns that the gentleman is talking about. So I don't think that we could really provide any sort of answer to him on what the usage could be or how it is managed, because it's not something that's being managed by the district.
Okay. Anybody else in the audience that'd like to speak today? Anybody else? Anybody else out in video land? Anybody else that'd like to comment today?
John has his
Okay.
hand raised.
Go ahead, John.
Madam President, this may be a good time to just acknowledge that we did get a comment letter from the Department of Natural Resources. The Department of Natural Resources letter is dated April 12th. It's directed to Mr. Tomczyk. We should note its receipt for the record. It does not provide any comments challenging what the engineer is recommending as the constructed configuration or hydraulic efficiency of the ditch, but it does highlight several concerns the DNR would have regarding subsequent maintenance of the drainage system, which are items that we as a matter of course typically coordinate with the DNR on prior to conducting any work on the drainage system. So I just wanted to make sure that that got noted for the record that we did receive a comment letter. Again, it's dated April 12th, 2022, and we will include that in the record of proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Is there anything else that should be read into the record today? Chris, that was what you were, that was the same thing. Okay. Anything else? Anybody else like to speak? Well,
Yeah.
Okay, so seeing no more, we're going to close our public hearing and certainly thank everybody who came today, and we will be discussing it shortly here. Marcy, you had a comment?
Yes, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank folks that attended today. This is the kind of input that we need. It's not unusual for us to be looking at these issues throughout the watershed, because like it was mentioned by the city engineer, a lot of this development occurred prior to any set understanding of who's responsible for what. Is it the private developer? Is it the city? Or is it the watershed district? I'd also like to recognize Dr. Lazarus this morning. He's the newest member of the Citizens Advisory Committee of the Rice Creek Watershed District, and we certainly appreciate his input as well as all of those that volunteer to serve on that committee. And I think you actually were recruited in November when we had this, our public information meeting. So always good to see residents of the watershed in attendance.
Yes, it is.
So thank you.
Okay, anything else to the board? It's time for our discussion for action.
Madam President, you want the motion first and then the discussion?
Yes, please.
Let me make it.
Flat on page 3.
All right. Madam President, I move that we direct staff to prepare findings and an order consistent with the proceedings, that the draft findings and order be written to effect the reestablishment and correction of the public drainage system record consistent with the engineer's findings, and that we recess this hearing to the board's regular meeting on May 11th, 2022 at 9 a.m. or by adjournment to an appropriate time on the board's agenda, at which meeting we will consider findings and an order for the proposed reestablishment and correction of the public drainage record system.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion?
Yes, Madam President. So today we heard concern about the culverts and whether they're the condition they're in, how much sediment's in them. And it brings to my mind as to, are the culverts sized properly? Often in the past that's happened. And as you check the profile, I just ask that they certainly that the culverts be not only at the correct elevation for the profile, but also the proper size, at least large enough. Having them cleaned often as culverts do become traps for sedimentation, and they need attention a lot more often than, say, every 30 years or so, as we've had that experience with other parts of the district. So I'd hope that we can take a look to see if the culverts are sedimenting in because there's too much sediment in the entire profile, or if it's just a particular why that's coming about, because it becomes a flood hazard eventually. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from the board? Manager Wyatt? Anybody? Manager Bradley?
None?
No? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. We'll call the question. Manager Bradley?
Yes.
Manager Waller?
Yes.
Manager Wynan?
Yes.
Manager Wagaman?
Yes.
And Manager Priner, yes. Okay, so that is the board action for the day on this realignment hearing. Okay, thank you, everyone. You certainly can stay for the rest if you like. Okay, so it's open mic. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to comment today that hasn't commented on this? Anybody else?
2 months, enough excitement, I guess.
Okay, we are going to continue our meeting. Items requiring board action. Kyle?
For your consideration today, we have a first pay request for Pearson Companies and their work on the Preview Lake outfall or Preview Lake outlet structure replacement. As you know, I've got some photos in your packet on pages, I believe, 57 and 58. Show you some of the work that's been done to date. We were able to have that structure substantially replaced in early March. Remaining work includes installation of the aluminum stop log weir structure, as those materials are a little more difficult to come by these days. But we're working with our engineers, working with the contractor on some shop drawings for those.
Hey, hold on a second.
Yep.
Could everybody please go to the hallway if you're speaking so that we can continue our meeting? Thank you. There you go, Kyle.
Great, thank you. Again, so the project, again, is substantially completed at this time. There's a few additional items of work to be installed and land restored in the spring. At this time, the district engineer has approved, and staff also recommends that the first payment to Peterson Companies be issued in the amount of $56,395.60.
Okay, any questions for Kyle? If not, we have proposed motion on 56.
Madam President, I'll move Peterson Companies Incorporated pay request as submitted and certified by the district engineer and direct the staff to issue a payment in the amount of $395.60. $56,395.60.
Need a second?
Second?
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Any further discussion on this? Not, we'll call for a vote. Manager Waller?
Yes.
Manager Winan?
Yes.
Manager Wageman?
Yes.
Manager Bradley?
Yes.
And Manager Pryor, yes, motion passes. Okay, thank you, Kyle. The next thing is number 2, which we added, and that is regard the, let's see here, the letter that we're sending out to our reps. Let's get this stuff out of the way. Hold on, I gotta find my notes here.
That's mine too.
Okay, we should have Beth. Very good.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
President Priner, as we discussed at the workshop, the board had directed that a letter be drafted to address the consideration of the omnibus bill, specifically House File 4272 that became a part of that. Staff had drafted such a document, shared it out with the managers. There was some response by Manager Bradley, some adjustments. Some of the language that was utilized came from Mr. Kolb in a letter that he had drafted. I guess staff have a couple of comments in reviewing it. I would say it's good in that shorter is better and to the point. Get the attention of the reader and such. I think it's important that the district consider inclusion of stormwater issues. I think in the absence of making note of that the reader and the elected representatives may not make the connection that this is an important issue for their constituents in the urban areas. In other words, I don't want them to lose sight of it affecting metropolitan areas, that it's not a ditch ag issue only. So I think some adjustment in that regard would be important. There's adjustment of some spelling on my name and so on and so forth. When I stop there, it might be good to mention, the number of cities, because that represents how Rice Creek deals with watershed issues, across political boundaries. And maybe if you'd entertain any comments from Beth as well.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank Beth for getting this together so quickly. And Mike for following through, because it is kind of imperative we get this done in a shorter time. Beth, comments on the letter that you received, corrections, and then the next comments.
Just a couple things. I would like to utilize Manager Bradley's letter for the most part with permission of looking for a couple of opportunities when we talk about 116 miles of public drainage, reminding the readers that it is going through 16 cities so that we can hopefully capture some support from some representatives in some of our urban areas that might otherwise think that they are for this. I think we can get them to oppose this if we remind them that this goes through that our public drainage system is the stormwater conveyance for their cities. And then making sure that I spell my boss's name correctly in his email.
Oh, picky.
Well, can I suggest that in general, maybe we could pass it as a board with the letter to be.
Well, Madam President, I don't have any problem passing with the board, but I comment first that besides the spelling of Tomzak, yeah, I think Nick made a very important contribution here about the language. And as I look at the letter, the words public drainage authority are proper, of course, language, but to make it understood here, over the years, the district has changed this to call this the stormwater conveyance system. And that way, I think it emphasizes what the administrator's talking about here, the urbanness of it and the importance of the stormwater drainage in the urban area. It certainly does the same thing in the agricultural outstate part also, but people don't associate the word drainage necessary with stormwater conveyance. And so I agree with the administrator here. I'd like to see that kind of language put into this letter a little more clearly here. That's because that's essentially what we're trying to say. That look, this is going to be a problem for us working on our stormwater conveyance system and providing that protection and safety in these 16 cities.
Okay.
President Kreiner, I was just going to note kudos to Beth. That was in her original spoke to the stormwater, and we had discussions on the next draft. I know Mr. Kolb would like to speak, and probably others.
We're going to go with Mr. Kolb, please.
Thank you, Madam President. I just echo, I think it's already been mentioned, but I do think echoing what Beth has said and echoing also what Manager Waller has said, it is important, I think, for this specific audience to highlight the fact that these public drainage systems do serve as the primary stormwater conveyance system and primary outlet for municipal stormwater systems within the district. I think we lose something in the effect if that is not highlighted to this particular audience.
I agree. My main concern is to keep it precise, because 99 of the people we send it to are not going to read it anyway. Their staff will read it, and they'll say, well, this is important or this isn't important. They put it on their desk or they don't. And so my suggestion is finish off the letter in whatever context we think the board approves it today to move forward. And then we'll take it upon Mr. Kolb and Nick and Beth and Mike to give us a final copy to sign so we can get it moved through this process.
So, Madam President, I'm always happy somebody can improve on anything I've attempted to improve on. I would only suggest that we not add that in the first paragraph, that we would add the discussion you're looking for, probably as a start to the third paragraph, or in that point, because what we really want to get across to them is the damage they're about to cause. So I too want to thank Beth. If you look at you won't find more than 3 new words of mine in here. This is all Beth's language. I just took out some of the long historical provisions and stuff. So thank you, Beth. You did a great job.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that the third paragraph is a perfect space to really drive that home. And if you guys, if the board would indulge me for a minute, I would like to just share the thought I have for this in a larger context.
Good.
Our goal will be to have this letter out within the next day, by today, hopefully. We will also be able to kind of take from this and provide feedback to the Board of Water and Soil Resources, so that, you know, we're touching all bases as we round home. And then I would recommend that we get this written letter into the hands of our legislators, and then we follow up using our e-newsletter platform MailChimp that we have used to send to legislators before. And we have pretty good results in them opening those and reading them from us. And I would like to use very similar language, maybe edit it a little more tightly, but include photographs from some situations we've had across our district when the public drainage system had some obstructions. So show them some pictures of flooding.
Yes.
And get their attention in that. So kind of come at them from a couple different ways.
Good, that shows them the danger of doing this. Okay, anybody else comments?
To the board, I'm sorry, I missed Monday's meeting. I did listen to the first hour and a half last night at 9 o'clock and didn't quite get to this discussion, so I'm behind on that. But I just want to add that there is a MAUD board meeting Monday morning that, as a Clean Water Council representative, I'm actually in attendance to that. So whether we want to engage MAUD or not, we need to. And then also Metro MAUD is meeting on Tuesday evening online. So if this appears like it's more a Metro issue than a full statewide watershed issue, that we need to have some partners behind us in this, and we can't, do this as a singular watershed district. So how we present that and speak about this to our colleagues will also be important.
Okay. Beth has the best communication with MAUD as a whole,
right,
I think. So
right.
She can.
Madam President.
Go ahead.
So I agree that, you have to send the letter out, wait a few days for it to be received and digested. And then the important part becomes where the watershed staff, sorry Beth, it's probably you, would initiate personal contacts, whether with the legislative rep for these individuals or with the city administrators of the cities that are involved, or the legislative, for lack of my nomenclature here, the assistants for the county commissioners that are involved. Because they will have the letter, and the reinforcement of a personal conversation with them about the importance of this will certainly make certain it doesn't just get pigeonholed into the recycle. And it takes a little more extra work, I realize, in contact, but that's what brings the success of creating these partnerships and to help us achieve the goal of retracting this from the omnibus bill.
Okay, and we're going to go to John Colvin. Also, John, would you please answer again, where did this come from? What was the purpose of whoever or whatever organization submitted this?
Thank you, Madam President. First, I'll just, to Manager Winan's comment, MAUD has already weighed in on the legislation in a manner similar to what is anticipated to be prepared for and delivered by the district. The origin of this bill, Representative Lippert is the original author. I believe he is from South Central Minnesota. He was approached by an organization, Friends of the Minnesota River Valley, to draft this legislation, and that's how it came to be. Okay. But as is highlighted in many of the comments, the concern is that nobody really knows what the necessity was for the legislation. And I don't want to speculate on that today, other than to say this is not the typical route that a bill like this would take. It would ordinarily go through the DWG, so there could be a level of understanding that it could be that concerns about it could be addressed, and then it would move through. So that is the origin of the bill. I'm not sure of exactly the overall purpose of it. We are not opposed, and your letter indicates so, to the transparency aspects of this. We think that's great. But this delay is of concern to you in particular because of how these systems work to convey and figure into your overall management of surface waters within the district.
John, did you say that MAUD has already weighed in on this? And
it has, and its objection was noted, I believe, in a committee report coming out of the House prior to its insertion into the omnibus bill.
Its objection, okay, good, so they're there.
Okay. Beth, comment?
I wanted to provide Manager Wynant a little bit of additional clarification when you were talking about MAUD and Metro MAUD and who the best, who might we align ourselves with and have the conversation with. One of our concerns with this is that it is almost presented as an agricultural issue, and so those watersheds and groups, kind of in non-metro parts of our state are very engaged. We see it as both. It's both urban and it has urban and rural implications. So just to kind of clarify, it was traditionally seen or initially seen as a more rural and outstate concern. But it has huge implications for those of us in the metro that rely on public drainage systems.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Questions, comments, anything further?
I would also say, as I'm reading this, I'm seeing House File 4292 referenced at the bottom and House File 4272 referenced at the top. That might be different because now it's in the omnibus bill. But I just Googled House File 4272, and it's a Veterans Affairs.
We'll go through and double check all of our numbers. It might be 4274.
It is 4274.
4274, okay.
Yeah. We had a note that I had some of the, we
all right.
caught a typo, but we overcorrected the wrong way.
Okay. And there is a 4274A, which is the amendment that adds in the 30-day waiting period.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder where they got the 30-day. Why is that the magic number? Nick, go ahead.
President Preiner, I guess my next thought was that we need a motion. I think if you'd please give your staff a little bit of latitude to go through it, and the managers might consider letting President Preiner give it the final read, since her signature will be on it.
Okay, we'll entertain a motion.
Madam President, I move that Rice Creek Watershed District communicate to our legislative partners and other agencies that would be concerned about proposed legislation that affects our ability as a drainage official drainage authority, using the draft we've reviewed today with modifications as discussed. It's to be signed by the President.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, it'll be a roll call. Manager Bradley.
Yes.
Manager Waller.
Yes.
Manager Wynant.
Yes.
Manager Wegman.
Yes.
And Manager Preiner, yes. Motion passes. Okay, thank you, everybody, and as soon as we get that, we'll be sending it on. And everybody will get notification it was sent, so if we want to talk to anybody, we can prepare ourselves. Okay, check register.
Okay, give me 1 second here. Madam President, I move to approve the check register dated April 13th, 2022 in the amount of $92,397.58, prepared by Redpath and Company.
Second.
Here we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Be a roll call. Manager Bradley.
Yes.
Manager Waller.
Yes.
Manager Wynan?
Yes.
Manager Wageman?
Yes.
Manager Priner, yes. Motion passes. Thank you. Items for discussion. We have Matt.
Madam Chair, members of the board, thanks for having me. I was so excited to see such a large audience here to learn about sediment monitoring on Rice Creek, and now disappointed that I'm sure they're going to be watching the video of it later. So I'm going to be turning this over to Joel Groden at USGS in just a moment here. I'll provide a quick introduction. Joel, in the meantime, if you want to start sharing your screen there to make sure that that works. So Joel Groden at USGS is going to be sharing a presentation on some work that actually started almost 12 years ago, a partnership between the USGS and the Rice Creek Watershed District to monitor sediment on Middle Rice Creek. And maybe many folks don't know this, but the USGS office is actually right across the street from Rice Creek. So made for a nice partnership. This work really began not having anything to do with the Middle Rice Creek Stabilization Project, but rather just as an opportunity for the USGS to highlight some of the sediment monitoring work that they can do, and also noting that sediment has been an issue in Middle Rice Creek in the past, and we're going to be hearing about the sedimentation basin just downstream of there in the future. So this work started, we doing okay here? Yes. So this work started prior to really knowing about the Middle Rice Creek Stabilization Project, but provided a nice opportunity once the project came around to redo some of that work and try and evaluate how the project did in reducing sediment moving downstream. Now, I think what Joel is going to mention, but I'll just mention it again, is that in retrospect, if we had the opportunity to design a study knowing exactly where the Middle Rice Creek project was going to be implemented, we may have designed this study a little bit differently. So it provided an opportunity, but continuing the work that started long before the project was done, I think limited our ability a little bit here in how these things were done. I don't have any notes at this time, so I'm going to turn things over to Joel Groden at USGS. He'll give the presentation, and then there's obviously time for questions after that. So Joel, take it away.
Thank you, Matt.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Joel Groden, and I'm a hydrologist working for USGS. And I first want to just thank the Rice Creek Watershed District for the opportunity to partner on this project, and it's been a great learning experience for all of us working together. So I'm going to just start out by just highlighting some background information on sediment transport. As Matt mentioned before, this really started out as a data collection effort, sampling sediment at the stream gauge. And we really got at trying to understand the total sediment transport at the site. And this is going above and beyond what the water quality standards are in Minnesota for sediment. And so we're really trying to understand all the sediment being transported. And sediment, there's different types of sediment, and we think about it in regards to mass and weight. So the heavier sized particles, the small rocks, gravels, sands, that's moving as bed load on the bottom of the river, and it's rolling and bouncing along the bottom. And then at the, above that, we have dissolved or suspended sediment load, and that's the smaller particles that can be transported by velocity or keeping it suspended in turbulent flow. And so we're really thinking about sands and fines being silt and clays. And that's what phosphorus can attach to, is the fine component of the suspended load. And those are the phases of transport. And I'm not going to get into this in too much detail. The main point I want to highlight is that sediment transport is extremely complex. Albert Einstein's son, he studied this, and I think he said that it was more complex than what his father came up with relativity. And there's a lot of people trying to understand this, and there's a lot of equations and variables to try to understand how this works. And the main point I want to highlight is it's very complex, and there's a lot going on. And there's different sources of sediment, and it's not like once the sediment gets into the river, it moves down a barrel to shotgun and goes out of the river. It can be stored in the floodplain, it can be stored in the channel, some of it can go all the way through. The bed load I was talking about, in Rice Creek, there's dunes that are traveling, and the dunes, it can switch between bed load and suspended load, and it's very dynamic, it's very complex, and that's the main point I want to highlight with this figure, with all these variables, and there's equations behind these, and it's complex, and there's a lot of people trying to understand it, but there's a lot of understanding that we still need to invest in to really try to, there's no silver bullet with monitoring suspended sediment. Stream gauging, it's easier to monitor, and suspended sediment's more of a challenge. So we went out and sampled suspended sediment at or near the stream gauge, and we used different types of samplers to sample the suspended sediment. This sampler on the left, it goes down through the water column at multiple verticals to collect the suspended sediment load, both the fines and sands, and it can't sample near the bottom, and it's not supposed to sample near the bottom. That's where we bring in a bed load sampler, and it goes across the river in multiple verticals, and it's resting on the bottom for a set amount of time so it can collect those larger size particles as they're rolling and skipping along the bottom. And when we go out, we have a representative picture of what the suspended sediment is, and the bed load is equaling the total load at the time of sampling. And at the same time, we also make note of the stream flow at the gauge when we collect that suspended sediment bed load sample. And it would be nice to know the suspended sediment bed load at every increment that we have discharge, but that's not always possible because the price would go up. It'd be very expensive to know the total load at every instance with a measurement like we do with stream flow. So we have to go out and collect periodic samples, and we have to take the discharge at that same time, and we create a relationship, and we use discharge to estimate suspended sediment and bed load when we don't have measurements, because we have a lot of confidence in our measurements, but we don't there's a lot more uncertainty in the times between measurements, and that's because we're using stream flow to estimate those values. So if we were to go out, and this is an example at another site across the country, and this is similar to what happens at Rice Creek. If we were to go out and sample Rice Creek at the same duration that we have stream flow measurements, or like we're estimating stream flow at the gauge, this is what the sediment record might look like. And you can see it does not match the discharge record or signal of the discharge. You can see at this first peak with the points in orange, I guess, it's peaking well before the stream flow peak, and then it's falling before the stream flow peak, before you even reach the stream flow peak. And so when you're developing a relationship between stream flow and sediment, this can be problematic, because at the same stream flow on the rising and falling limb of the hydrograph, you can have very different values of sediment. For example, at this discharge, 2 discharges of 11,100, on the rising limb you have a concentration of 650, and on the falling limb you have a concentration of 130. And when you're trying to, draw one line relating discharge to sediment, that can be very challenging because you have different values of sediment, and there's a lot of uncertainty. And we call this hysteresis, and it's very common in most rivers, I would say. And we have better ways to continuously measure sediment, such as turbidity and acoustics, but that can be very expensive to do that. And with limited funding to do this project, we had to rely on stream flow to estimate. And I just want to maybe explain it in an example that might make a little more sense to everyone. So stream flow and sediment, they're similar but different. They have some of the same properties governing the transport of discharge and sediment, but they're not related. They're not exactly correlated. They're similar but different. An example that you might be able to relate to is, let's say you and your significant other have a joint, some joint credit cards and some joint checking accounts and maybe single checking accounts. And let's say that on your joint credit card, you have online banking and you can see all the purchases that are made by you and your significant other and how much money is due and how much you paid or your significant other paid. But let's say your significant other does not have online banking and they just get a monthly statement in the mail, and so they just know what's due and what was paid last month, and they don't really have an idea of what's happening in between, what's spent. And that's kind of like stream flow is maybe the example of a person who is seeing exactly what's being charged and paid, and the person that has monthly statements, that's like getting a sample once a month. But then they're maybe just looking at their checking account and trying to track what's being spent, but they don't necessarily know what the other person's finances are in the relationship, and it gets somewhat complicated. And this is really just me talking about me and my wife's, financial confusion when we have all these separate accounts, and that's kind of what stream flow and sediment are. They're similar, and you might get some of the information, but you might not have the whole story too, because they're similar but different. And that's just maybe that helps illustrate it a little more. Maybe it's more confusing, but sediment transport is really hard to estimate in the times in between where we don't have samples. And discharge, we have a lot more certainty in those values because we have more of a direct measure of discharge at the gauge. And in an ideal world, we would develop a relationship, and as discharge increases, our sediment values would plot right on this line. And then we could have a lot of confidence in this line, and that has an equation associated to estimate sediment in times where we don't have samples. But in reality, the data ends up looking like this. And this is an example at Rice Creek, and this is common at, I would say, most sites around Minnesota, around the country. Stream flow is just a poor predictor of suspended sediment level. That's why USGS is invested in other technologies such as turbidity or acoustics, which is more of a direct measure of sediment. Like I said, that's very expensive to do that, and we didn't have the funds to do that, so we had to rely on just using stream flow. And you can just see the variability at right around 100 CFS. The values can range anywhere from 6 milligrams per liter to 60 milligrams per liter. So at one discharge, there's a lot of uncertainty where that value may be, and that's just because of stream flow and sediment. They're similar but different. There's different processes governing the two. And I just want to put this in perspective, looking at all of Minnesota. We conducted a statewide study recently, and I have more familiarity with doing work outside the metropolitan area, and so it's very interesting looking at Rice Creek compared to other sites around Minnesota. And generally, the sediment loads in Rice Creek are relatively small when you're looking at all the sites around Minnesota. This study looked at 60 sites approximately. Rice Creek wasn't included in this study because it is our only urban site that USGS works in regarding just sediment issues in Minnesota. And so generally the suspended sediment and bed load was much lower. The mean for the rest of Minnesota for suspended sediment was almost 200, and the mean for Rice Creek was 27. And then the mean for bed load was around 100, and the mean for Rice Creek was 16. And most of the sites in Minnesota too, they have in the suspended load, there's a larger portion that's suspended fines. I would say that it's around 80 to 70% is suspended, percentage-wise, is suspended fines for those 60 sites around Minnesota. In Rice Creek, it's more half and half, which there's a higher portion of sands than fines in Rice Creek than the rest of Minnesota. So that's interesting for a variety of different reasons. And I just want to put this into perspective too. You know, the max for all these years of data collection that we did, the max value of suspended sediment that we measured at Rice Creek was right around 100. And that's really low compared to the rest of Minnesota. The max values in this study for all these other sites was 6,000. And I would say it's pretty common to see values that are 300, 400, even 1,000 in the rest of Minnesota. And the max value that we measured was 100 for Rice Creek. So concentrations and bed load values are relatively low. And if you go out to Western United States, I mean, there's some streams there that are transporting, 20,000 to 40,000 milligrams per liter of suspended sediment. So just trying to put that in perspective that these values are relatively low to begin with. So as Matt mentioned, when this data collection started, there wasn't a plan to evaluate the restoration specifically, but when we knew the restoration was going to happen, we thought we would maybe try with the data that we had, but we kind of knew that based on stream flow being a poor predictor of suspended sediment, that we might not be able to see the effects of the restoration because our sampling site is downstream. In an ideal study, you would have upstream and downstream of the restoration sites, so you're monitoring what's coming in and going out, and really you'd want to have the same exact conditions pre and post, and that's impossible when you're dealing with a natural environment. I mean, if you could put a dome over the whole watershed and control rainfall and get the exact same conditions, that's how you'd have to do the study almost, because you're never going to mimic the conditions the samples were collected exactly, because as we all know that day-to-day weather changes, year-to-year weather changes, it's never the same year-to-year. And we had some pretty big differences between pre and post just based on rainfall and stream flow. We had more stream flow in the post monitoring period than in the pre. And as I've been talking about, we can't tell if that's because there was more sediment or just more stream flow. Because when you have more stream flow, you have more energy to transport sediment in the channel that's already there just because of the geologic condition of the area being more sand dominated. So generally we saw an increase, but we don't know if it's just more sediment or more stream flow, and it's likely a combination of both. We can't really say. We tried to look at differences between pre and post, but as I said, there's a lot of variability, and there may be differences, but we can't say if it's stream flow or more sediment. And even if it was more sediment, we can't say if it was directly from the restoration or not, just because there's all these other potential sources from the watershed. And where we're monitoring downstream is capturing a big component of the watershed. There's a lot of stormwater coming in, culverts, as you've been talking about already today. So there's a lot of other potential sources than maybe just stream bank erosion where we're monitoring it. And so we looked at these differences and we just thought that, due to the variability that we're seeing in the pre and post, that we made one line to represent all the data that we collected to estimate suspended sediment and bed load for all the years that we were interested in calculating annual loads. And generally what we saw too is that as discharge increased, we generally had sand in bed load and sand in suspension. That increased as well, which makes sense. You have more energy to transport those larger particles So that made sense. But what also makes sense too is that this isn't always the case, but what we saw with the fines is that as stream flow increase, the fines decrease. And that means that it is supply limited in this system, and that as your stream flow increase, your fines do increase. So that's good from a phosphorus loading standpoint, because you know that eventually that as stream flow increase, that you're having less fines go through the system. And from a total mass perspective, we just really saw like how much sand is really going through the system when we're looking at the proportions for each annual load. It's predominantly sand in both bed load and the suspended load. It's far outweighing the fines component on a year-to-year basis. And so there's more sand going down. And the other part of the study, when we proposed this work to really evaluate the restoration, we knew that the sampling of suspended sediment in bed load, we might not be able to tease out the restoration from that. So what we added was surveying and modeling to really compare and contrast the pre and post channels, because with modeling we can put the exact same stream flows through the model to look at the differences between the pre and post restoration channels. And so that was really our way of evaluating the actual restoration. And we evaluated the downstream section of the restoration. And so what we did is we actually went out with multiple pieces of surveying equipment to get both the bathymetry or elevation of the channels pre and post. And then we also used terrestrial LiDAR to get an accurate elevation of the whole area, floodplain included. And it's a high resolution data set. And this is really how the surveying is really important for a long-term approach. When you think of geomorphology, a lot of times we're doing studies, a 10-year study is amazing. Like, it's hard to find funding to even do a 10-year study. I would say the day and age we're in now, it's common to do 1 to 3 year studies just because of our funding mechanisms and maybe the human mindset. We want to try to get results quickly. But when you're talking about geologic time and sediment, you really have to think about this from the long-term scale. And when we do a survey like this, we're really trying to archive the elevations at that time. And then we can go back 50 years and we can compare the elevations 50 years from now and have a better idea of what's going on more from a global perspective than just collecting a sample at one given time, because there's, like I said, sediment doesn't always just move straight through the system. It can be deposited, the channel can migrate. And so now we have an archive of the original channel, and now we have an archive of the restoration with this high resolution survey data that we collected. And this is an example of all the data points that we collected with this survey equipment. So we can build our two-dimensional models to really compare and contrast the restoration and the original channel. So we use some modeling software to develop the models, and this is taking all that survey data into the models and then creating our modeling domain of both the pre and post. And now we can directly compare the two by putting the exact same stream flows into those models, and to see how the pre and post can compare. And generally what we're seeing is that there's more diversity in the morphology of the post restoration. You can see on the right there's more pools on the post than the pre on the left. There's maybe only 2 pools at this stream flow that we're comparing. There's more velocity in the post, which is good to maintain the channel, the morphology that we want for diverse habitat. So there's higher velocities, and to maintain those pools and so they don't fill in. And so there's more diverse morphology in the post and the pre. And we're also seeing that the channel has access to the floodplain at lower stream flow. So we're seeing water spread out and possibly sediment settling at lower stream flows than the original channel. And really what I think is the most promising is that shear stress, the amount of energy to maybe mobilize sediment to to erode a stream bank, to scour out the channel. You can see on the left that red, that's showing high shear stress in the original channel because it is basically a straight channel going through. So there's a lot more energy that straight channel can acquire to possibly move sediment to erode stream banks. And you can see that on the right, shear stress is much lower. It's almost negligible compared to the original channel. And so I think that is really showing how, that the possibility of erosion is being reduced, and having access to the floodplain, you're possibly storing sediment in the floodplain and it's not going downstream. So that's how we evaluated the pre and post restorations. And that's really how they need to be evaluated, is really at that reach scale. And I know Matt and others from Rice Creek are, really taking that work above and beyond what we could just do in this study. So they're monitoring it long term to really evaluate the effectiveness of the restoration at that reach scale, which is so important. So just wanted to thank you all again for this partnership. It's been a pleasure working with Rice Creek Watershed District, and have nothing but respect for all the work that you do. So thank you, everyone. Any questions?
Any questions for Joel?
Joel, could you go back to the slide with the Minnesota and the Rice Creek numbers on it?
Yeah, no problem.
And were those numbers based on average? Total of all the okay. Is this
yeah,
total
they're
of all the
they're average values. So
average values of all these sites?
Yep. So basically, the top value. Let's see. This value doesn't include Rice Creek data, and so the 190 and the 106. So that's taking like all the data around the state at these 60 sites and having an average, and it averages out to 190, 106, 190 for suspended, and 106 for bed load. And then I took the average values for just the data collected in Rice Creek, and it's 27 and 16. So the concentrations and loads in Rice Creek are much lower compared to the rest of the state.
Right.
And, a lot of these sites are, Minnesota River Mankato, and southeastern Minnesota, northwest Minnesota, like going into, it's a lot of ag areas, impaired waters, I would say. So, like we're seeing max values for suspended, it can be upwards greater than 6,000 in the rest of Minnesota, and the max value for suspended sediment in Rice Creek was 100. Yeah. So I'm just saying, for perspective, to me, like Rice Creek looks, it seems low.
Yeah.
And and just wanted to I think it's good to just take a step back for everyone and think about that. And it's just for thought.
Well, yes, all you have to do is see the confluence of the Minnesota and the Mississippi, and get those big numbers.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's a great visual to really highlight that.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Joel. Excellent. Good information. We'll go back to Matt.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time.
Mm-hmm.
Members of the board, I have a very brief presentation to share here. Just some final thoughts, just a couple of slides. As this is the culmination of about 12 years of work, not continuously working with the USGS, but several segments of work on either side of the Mineral Rice Creek project. Some final thoughts and observations. I think that the work that USGS did was very valuable, provided some very interesting insights. I also think, and Joel alluded to this, it's showing us the value in a monitoring program of monitoring different components of the system. So in this case, we were trying to directly measure suspended sediment and look for changes pre and post project. So that graph on the left was my idea of how this might work. And I still maintain it was a good idea, but didn't quite pan out in this case. And Joel talked about this too, but the primary issue there is that there's just a poor relationship between flow and suspended sediment. So it makes it really difficult statistically to see changes with this type of data set. We did try using turbidimeters that measures turbidity in the water. The first few years also, that also didn't work. Part of that is, I think, due to what Manager Winan brought up, that suspended sediment concentrations in general are very low in Middle Rice Creek. We think of it as having a sediment problem in the sedimentation basin, and there is, but because overall sediment values are low, it makes it difficult to monitor. Joel shared this, but I'll just share it again. I mentioned that there's other things that we have been monitoring and we will continue to monitor that suggest that the Middle Rice Creek project was very successful in achieving its goals. A big part of it is a reduction in shear stress. So shear stress is the amount of stress that the water is exerting on the bed or the bank to move sediment as it does work. And we saw a significant reduction in shear stress with the project as we did the meander restoration project. That is borne out then in the survey work that we did, and this is a slide from the MAUD presentation that I gave a couple of years ago. And Manager Winan, you mentioned a couple meetings ago that you saw some students from the U of M out there collecting survey data. When that data is processed, this is what it will look like. But these are data sets collected from 2016 prior to the project in 2019. What we're seeing is that the channel, after the project is done, remains stable and is not exporting sediment. So it's not moving laterally and scouring banks. In this case, from 2016 to 2019, it actually captured some sediment. That's probably a short-term occurrence, but what we like to see is that it's stable and not exporting sediment. And certainly we see that with the vegetation surveys that we do on the site. We're not seeing raw banks, we're not seeing mass wasting, big chunks of the sediment or of the bank collapsing down into the stream as we saw at some sites previously. And this is interesting. Joel mentioned that in Middle Rice Creek, the bed load, that is the sediment or the sands that are kind of tumbling along the bottom of the channel, makes up a larger portion of the total sediment load. And I mentioned that the USGS has their office very close to Rice Creek, which means that when they do demonstrations and things like that, they tend to use Rice Creek to do these demonstrations. These are some photos from, I think, around 2009, when the USGS had a sediment monitoring expert in town and was looking for a site to do some demonstrations. So naturally, they chose Rice Creek, right across the street from the office. Here they are deploying the bed load monitoring device in Rice Creek. And what was interesting about that day is that this national sediment expert, I believe he's second from left here, remarked as he was deploying the device, well, we're not really going to get anything because stream flow is so low this day, but I'll show you how to use the equipment. This is just a demonstration. But when they pulled the sampler up, there was actually a fair amount of bed load material captured in the device. So showing that the fine sands, and that is the native material in Middle Rice Creek, is always moving through Middle Rice Creek. And that's, Joel showed this graph here too, but this light brown color is bed load, suspended sediment. So when you're looking at the total load, which is the whole bar, in many cases it makes up nearly half of the total amount of sediment that's moving down the creek, which I think is unique. I think Joel mentioned that. So just some parting thoughts then as we wrap this up. All of the information, and this is not, earth-shattering information here, but all of the information suggests that sediment loads are based on flow. So with higher flows, there's more sediment moving down the creek. So to address excess sediment, like the sediment that's piling up in the sedimentation basin, the district should be continuing to address peak flow and runoff issues like with our rules and like with projects to capture runoff and try and reduce peak flows. I think the evidence in all of this work suggests that we should continue to restore and repair channels and stream banks, especially when it's targeting fine sediments and silts, because that's what transports more phosphorus. But I also think we need to recognize that some portion of this sediment load, like the bed load, is always going to be transported downstream into the Long Lake Side Basin or into Long Lake. And that's just the nature of this system and the fine sediment that's moving through it. So those were my final parting thoughts. And if there are any other questions, happy to entertain that.
Questions?
Yes. Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Joel. So, like I said, I listened to the discussion about Lock Lake yesterday, 2 days ago, and you know, we have Privy Lake, we have the Long Lake Sed Basin. One good rain could take care of a lot of that sediment. So it just, to your point about flow. And on a policy perspective, as we're considering you know, everything from Ramsey County Ditch 8 to this, there's a lot of potential work in front of us as we keep bringing up one sediment basin after another. So I think some of the questions we have is, at least that I have, is how much work is enough work?
How do we find the balance?
How you find the balance? Because I think what we heard today with you know, the pond, which was being called a lake, is it's functioning as a pond. It was a lake. What are the expectations of the folks that surround those water bodies? And Manager Bradley, you said the same thing on Monday about you know, doing work in Lock Lake, how that affects the residents surrounding those areas. So not that we have any answers right now, but we've now merged social science with you know, science, ecological science, and how do we find that balance? And I think that this piece of legislation that we're responding to has a lot to do with all this sediment, you know, and the rural-urban discussions that go on. So if anybody has any ideas or directions or wisdom on how we're supposed to come to these decisions, I'd be happy to hear it.
Madam President,
it's just a
Manager
statement.
Wynn?
You don't
Sure.
have to.
Yeah. You know, my final thoughts, I think I was offering some ideas there. You know, the long term is trying to deal with peak flows, especially as we have more frequent and intense rainfall. It's with rules and with projects trying to capture that peak flow to avoid those situations like the 2011 mega flood. Not that, I mean, when you get to have that much rain, there's not a whole lot you can do, but the rules in those projects are designed to deal with issues like that. I think the stream bank stabilization and restoration that we're doing is working, and you know, treats the issue before it ends up in a sediment basin, which can be very expensive. So those are things to look at long term, but certainly agree that it's a tough issue.
And it's a long-term process, so patience is needed in the midst of this, and it's definitely not a quick fix.
No.
And I think you know, people are into quick fixes. So thank you. It's brilliant.
The work did result in a recently published USGS report. If the board is interested in that, happy to share that. This actually just came out a little over a week ago, so hot off the presses.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, Madam President, Matt, I think it's important that you be recognized for this has been a 12-year project. And I remember when we started to talk about this quite a long time ago. And I think it's long-term projects and studies like that are important to be taken up, because in the end we learned something. But on the other hand, we also learned that our sediment basins that we've created, whether they're the big ones like Lock Lake or Long Lake, or the small ones that are in the individual development areas themselves, have been very successful. I mean, we don't have a lot of large exposed soil matters in this 180 square miles, and that allows us to do it. But congratulations on just being staying here and continuing this project, because I think this has been something you've been doing for about 12 years, and I reckon you've been here 15 or 16 now, somewhere in there.
Well, that's about right, yes.
So, thank you for working on this project and seeing it through.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Kyle? Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Speaking of basement.
Yeah.
Speaking of sediment, Madam President, members of the board, our goal here today is to entertain some board discussion generally about the Long Lake Sediment Basin and our proposed project to move that forward. We had a bid opening on April 5th. I'll be careful at this time. We're going to talk very generally. We will be bringing a bid recommendation back to you at your next meeting at the end of April. So we're not going to talk about who bid. We're not going to talk about what the amount of their bids were, other than to generally say that, as you're aware, our engineer's estimate for the project was around $500,000. The bids that we did receive are in the range of 1.1 to 1.2 million. And so that presents some...
American money?
That would be correct, Manager Waller. And so what I would like to do today is share some kind of working thoughts that we have, maybe get some feedback from the board that might guide staff and the engineer as we prepare our recommendation for you in a couple weeks.
Kyle, could you please restate the cost? I didn't come through.
Sure.
Bad hearing, Mike?
We probably knocked you over, Manager Bradley. Our engineer's estimate was around $500,000, and we'll say generally that the bids received are in the range of 1.1 to 1.2 million. So a little more than double what we had been anticipating. You know, I'm going to work through just a couple of points here. I imagine Chris will chime in as well on some thoughts related to that numerical issue that we're facing. Ultimately, you know, the options the board will have would be to, you know, eventually award the project based on the bids received. That would allow us to complete the project now with you know, a set of known conditions and known costs. You know, we know what we're looking at today. We have an existing lease on the dewatering site, which we are tied into to the tune of about $85,000 to $90,000. Doing so would require utilization of existing available fund balance that the district has. I'll be clear, we do have fund balance to handle that expense. Another option would eventually be to, you know, reject the bids, and we could either rebid now or at a later time. And again, you know, I would imagine, you know, Chris can discuss some of the implications of that. Regarding the bids that we've received, again, generally, staff felt it important to try and take a look at some of the differences between the project as proposed here in 2022 versus back in 2013, which was the last time that we undertook this effort, 2012, 2013. They're very much apples and oranges in trying to make some comparison there, certainly both in terms of dredge quantity. We're a little more than double, maybe 2.5 times the volume this time around. Additionally, the last time around, the selected contractor was able to dredge the material, keep it, incorporate it, and use it on their site. This time around, we had additional costs expected to be incurred for, you know, if you will, more intense management of that dredge material on the site, and then hauling that material off-site because it all has to be removed. Trying to, as admittedly crudely as it is, to try and make those a little more comparable in terms of scope. You know, my rough estimation is that on a per cubic yard basis, we're looking at about double the cost of what it was 10 years ago. There's a lot of reasons that might be the case. Fuel cost uncertainty in the future here, certainly increased labor cost over the last decade and in recent years. So just, you know, throwing that out there, and I think we can have a more robust discussion about that in a couple of weeks. but these are just things to be thinking about. And ultimately, I think the main question that it's going to come down to in the short term is, does the board have the appetite to bite the bullet, clean the sediment basin now while we know we have access to the site, or gamble on potential future unknowns if we were to kick this down the road a little farther. We know the basin is, at or beyond capacity right now. So going to the discussion we just had, the longer that basin sits in its current condition, sediment continues to now move beyond the basin down into Long Lake. And so, there are those sorts of considerations to keep in mind. There are some uncertainties in the future. I will share Ramsey County is set to approve our access agreement at their April 26th county board meeting. So that's good, and that gives us access under those terms for the next 20 years. We do not know that the dewatering site will be available in the future, potentially in the near future. So further, future, I should say, cleanouts that we might consider potentially would need to utilize or search for other creative alternatives to get the material out of that basin, which we are not sure that Ramsey County would be supportive of. I'm not saying they wouldn't be, but we have additional, I'm emphasizing the additional unknowns we have moving this down to the future. So with that, Chris, if you have anything else to share, otherwise we can entertain some questions or concerns from the board.
Sure, Madam President. So I'll just talk really briefly about our engineer's estimate. As Kyle indicated, we had estimated approximately $500,000 for the project going into this effort. A lot of that estimate was based on prices that we had obtained in 2012 for the previous version of the project. And that, of course, 10 years ago was a different time period, both from general pricing, but also from how the contractors were situated at that time compared to where they are at now. There's been changes in ownership of some of these companies. There's been changes, merging of different companies that work in this kind of industry. And as we saw from the bids, we only received 2 bids this time around, which isn't a very large sample set to draw conclusions from as to what the efficacy of those numbers are. I think if we were to look back and try to weigh more heavily on other dredging projects that had occurred prior to 2012 in this location, we could have potentially came up with a somewhat higher number for our engineer's estimate. But it's one of those things we could look at it, a dozen different ways and come up with a dozen different answers for what our estimate is. In any case, I don't think that we could reasonably come up with a cost that would probably be matching what we've received for these bids here right now. But likewise, I don't know of anything that we have in our spec or plan right now that could be modified in the future that necessarily would change the cost in a future bid. The only thing that we've heard feedback from those who were proposing or pondering a bid on this project was the option for mechanical dredging as opposed to hydraulic dredging. So the basin was mechanically dredged in the past a couple of times. And we do have that history at Hanson Park of doing mechanical dredging. At Hanson Park, though, is a little different situation where you have less flow coming through a site and more opportunity to manage flows due to grade across the site. Whereas in this case, we have the basin, which is right next to Long Lake. You kind of have almost a static water elevation, and you have much greater flow, of course, with Rice Creek coming in, which could create challenges for dewatering of areas to do a mechanical excavation. In addition to that, the fact that we have we don't have any sort of access rights secured for doing mechanical excavation, which would be far different than a hydraulic excavation. So there's a lot of unknowns to doing that if we were to look at that as an alternative means of completing this action.
One question, Chris, are you saying that there was a lot more companies that talked about bidding that didn't bid? Was there quite a few that chose to pass, or?
Be careful here, just in general.
I'll just say the plan holders, there were other plan holders that
did not choose to bid.
Did not choose to bid on this, yes.
Thank you.
Well, the only
Madam
thing
President?
Go ahead, Mike.
So, Chris, how long are the bids good for?
Go ahead, Kyle.
Madam President, Manager Bradley, we have 60 days. So we do have, I believe, the latest date that a decision must be made according to our specifications would be at the board's May 25th meeting.
Okay. And then if we proceed with this thing, I'm assuming we are projecting that we would have like 9 years before we'd face the next time this was a problem?
Based on past sedimentation rates, I would say in the range of 7 to 10 years.
Okay. So I'm right where I was with Lock Lake. The real question to me is, what's the consequences of doing nothing? I mean, I don't know if we can answer that in 60 days, but we sure as heck ought to be able to answer it in 7 years.
Yeah, and my perspective is I've kind of been looking at what the cities are doing because their budgets are all getting pretty tight too. Some of them are going ahead with what they have on the table and then scheduling out more years for their next projects so they have time to catch up to their money. And some are just simply not doing anything this year, waiting for hopefully better prices, which will happen once the economy goes. That's where we were in 2008, is we had really good prices.
Right.
And so we could really accomplish a lot.
The problem I see is I'm not sure this is going to be a fast turnaround.
No, 2008 wasn't it? But anyway, that was their perspective. Do immediate stuff like we have this on the table, and then back everything else up to be able to afford it. So that's what some are doing. So I don't know what the best answer is because we just have to decide it. And I'm sure Kyle would say, let's get it done, because that's what we do, yeah.
Madam President, not necessarily, I think, and what I will say is, we're still preparing what our recommendation will be. We're just trying to give you a primer here today, given that it is a big decision, bigger decision than we thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
So we'll definitely come prepared, with a recommended path forward in the very near future. Okay. But again, any concerns that the board has, which some have been shared here, are helpful to your staff and engineer.
Go ahead.
Kyle, you said that the dredged material would have to be taken off-site. Why is it different this time around than last time around?
So last time around was Bel Air Builders, Bel Air Site Work, Bel Air anyway, was the contractor. They owned the property where we dewatered at that time and are proposing to dewater in the future. It was a fortunate situation where the city of New Brighton had required them to begin constructing an earthen sound barrier to deflect noise from their material operations across the Race Creek Valley to the homes on the west side of the creek. So they had been in the process of accumulating material to build that earthen barrier. Mm-hmm. That earthen barrier is now complete. So, we're talking about 18,000 cubic yards of material that its future uses. I mean, it's likely has some use, but that particular site not only they don't have a need for incorporating that material into that particular site anymore. So therefore, and again, we're working with Merlowski Properties, who is the current owner of that facility where we propose to dewater. We have to leave that site in the condition that we find it, which is flat.
So all that material has to come out of the water and then up the hill and then transport it someplace. So who will receive all that sediment?
That is up to the contractor to find a suitable disposal site, whether that be through other construction activities, et cetera. Many of them operate yards where they could, save or use this material for future, but it still has to be hauled, and that is expensive.
Yeah.
So, Madam President.
Go ahead.
Kyle, we cleaned this out in my time here. This will be the third time. I think the first time was real early when you guys first came. Correct me as to what happened to the material. We did it mechanically, first of all, and that's probably a cost savings. I realize that. You'll probably tell us that in a few weeks. That's fine. But didn't the contractor at that time use that material someplace in the sanitation area, or some? I've forgotten what happened to the material when we cleaned it the first time. It was trucked out. Where to go?
Madam President, Manager Waller, I am not sure where it went the first time. I believe that was right before or right as I came. I was not involved with that. It hasn't been raised yet today, and I will mention this. The other issue we have with mechanical operations today versus, say, back in 2007-08 when it was the last time we mechanically dredged this basin. At that time, Ramsey County Parks had not, if you will, developed that part of the regional park. There was a footpath through there, so they were able to use that footpath as a haul road, and then just restore the grass that was growing there. Today, that path is an improved paved trail. Impacts to that trail are not going to be tenable for the county. So our route, what would have been a routine haul route for mechanical operations, is no longer available.
Yes, I recall that Ramsey County kerfuffle that went on with that, yes. But I'd like to see what happened to that. I thought it was, I don't know if I remember the contractor correct, but I thought it was something to do with sanitation use. But maybe, anyways, it disappeared. So if you could find out what
Maybe because the name was Bel Air, you're thinking sanitation.
I was thinking, well, that's the last one we did,
Yeah.
was Bel Air. I was thinking it was somebody else in the sanitation business before that, or a contractor. But anyways, besides cheerleading for depression, is there anything else you have to talk about this morning?
I believe that's it. We can look into the files and see what information is there. We may or may not have the information on the ultimate disposal location, but if that's available, we can find that. I don't have anything else uplifting for you at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Kyle.
Thank you for the good news.
All right. I would like to adjourn by 11:30 if possible. I have an appointment. So if we could go through district engineer update, anything, Chris?
Madam President, no, I don't have anything to add.
Okay, administrator?
I have nothing to share.
Okay, manager's update?
Nothing for me?
Nothing for you. Manager Bradley?
Once again, I thank you for the opportunity to participate by distance.
You're welcome. I'm glad it worked out. Manager Waller?
I just mentioned that, and shortly here, because I too want to get on with some things, is that there's legislation also about the aquifer again in White Bear Lake, and it affects our communities, and right now that legislation needs to be halted and a solution found for how to solve the issue with White Bear Lake on a permanent basis. And I'd suggest that one of those things that could be helpful is that we received information about counties with groundwater plans, which Washington County has. Might be a funding source because of that groundwater plan, or using surface water as we have. I just want to remind everybody that 80 million gallons annually is saved by the reuse program that Rice Creek began with the city of Hugo out of the aquifer. Thank you, Madam President.
Really has been effective. Manager Wyatt?
Nothing.
And nothing new from me, so I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Manager Bradley?
Nothing.
Manager Waller?
Oh, yes.
Yes,
Oh.
yes.
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 Manager Wyatt?
Yes.
Manager Wegman?
Yes.
And Manager Reiner, yes. Motion adjourned. Thank you.